For 8 years, a child lived in complete silence. No music, no laughter, no voice calling his name. Doctors said it is permanent. Specialists across continents agreed. Millions were spent chasing answers that never came. What if the miracle wasn't missing, just ignored? A maid noticed what the world's best experts had overlooked, and in one forbidden moment, she made a decision that could either save a child's life or destroy her own forever. This is not just a story about healing, it's about who we trust, who we ignore, and how miracles sometimes arrive wearing an apron instead of a lab coat. For 8 long years, the boy touched his ear. It was never dramatic or obvious, just a small repeated movement, his fingers brushing his right ear as if trying to fix something no one else could see. Every doctor said the same thing, there's nothing we can do. His father spent millions, flew across the world, begged specialists to look again, and they all shrugged. Then one house cleaner noticed something no one else did, and what she found inside that child's ear would leave everyone speechless. Jonathan Hale was a billionaire, private jets, mansions, more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, but his son Eli was born deaf. 8 years old, never heard a sound. Jonathan tried everything: Johns Hopkins, Switzerland, Tokyo, specialists who charged thousands per hour, tests, scans, procedures that left his son exhausted and frightened, and every verdict was the same: irreversible, congenital. You need to accept this. Accept it. How could he accept that his boy would live in silence forever? How could he accept that Eli would never hear his father say, "I'm sorry your mother isn't here"? Jonathan couldn't accept it because Eli was all he had left. His wife Margaret died the day Eli was born. Complications, too much bleeding, too little time. Jonathan held her hand while the light left her eyes. She tried to say something, her lips moved but no sound came out, just like their son. That moment never left him. Jonathan never forgave himself. If he had chosen a different hospital, if he had demanded better care, if he had paid closer attention, maybe Margaret would still be alive, maybe Eli would be different. The guilt sat on his chest like a stone he could never lift, so Jonathan did the only thing he knew how to do: he spent money. Millions of dollars, flights across oceans, hotels that cost more per night than most people earned in a month, and every doctor said the same thing: your son's deafness is permanent. Accept it. But Jonathan refused. Somewhere out there, someone had to have the answer. He didn't realize the answer wasn't coming from a specialist, it was coming from a woman he had just hired to clean his floors. Her name was Grace Miller, 27 years old, no degree, no credentials, just a woman trying to keep her grandmother alive. Back in Newark, her grandmother lay in a nursing home bed while the bills piled up on Grace's kitchen table like a tower she couldn't stop from growing. 3 months behind, that's what the letter said. If she didn't pay soon, they would transfer her grandmother to a state facility, the kind of place where people were forgotten, where no one held your hand, where you became a number instead of a name. Grace couldn't let that happen. That grandmother had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when Grace was 11, fed her when there was nothing in the fridge, prayed over her when life felt impossible. That woman deserved better than a cold room and strangers who didn't care, so Grace took the job, a maid's job, at a billionaire's mansion. She didn't care about the address or the wealth, she just needed the paycheck. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, met her at the door with a stern face and sharp eyes, the kind of woman who noticed everything and forgave nothing. "Your Grace." "Yes, ma'am." "You'll clean, you'll stay quiet, you'll keep to yourself. Mr. Hale doesn't like disruptions, especially around his son." Grace nodded and said she understood. "Do you?" The last girl didn't. She thought she could help the boy. She was gone within a week. Grace swallowed and said she was just there to work. Mrs. Collins nodded once and told her to follow. As they walked through the mansion, Grace kept her eyes down, but she noticed everything: the silence thick and heavy, almost alive, servants moving without speaking or smiling, footsteps soft and careful because they had learned quickly that Mr. Hale liked things quiet, no music, no television, no laughter, just silence, and somewhere inside that silence, a father was drowning. Then Grace saw him, a small boy sitting on the marble staircase arranging toy cars in a perfect line, not looking up or acknowledging anyone, shoulders hunched, movements careful and precise. But what caught Grace's attention was the way he touched his right ear, just briefly, almost like a habit, and the tiny wince that crossed his face each time he did. Grace's chest tightened. She had seen that look before. She said nothing and kept walking, but her heart whispered something she couldn't ignore: pay attention. Days passed. Grace cleaned floors, wiped windows, folded linens, kept her head down like Mrs. Collins instructed, but she couldn't stop watching Eli. Every morning the same routine, the boy sitting alone in the sunroom surrounded by model airplanes and puzzle pieces, his world small, contained, safe. The other servants avoided him, not out of cruelty but fear. Some whispered that the boy was cursed, that losing his mother at birth had taken his hearing with her, superstition, but Grace saw something different. She saw a child who was desperately lonely, a boy who pressed his small hand against the glass watching the world move without him. She saw how his shoulders sank when his father walked past without stopping, and she saw how he touched his ear over and over, wincing each time, and no one noticed, or maybe they had stopped noticing long ago. One afternoon, Grace was dusting the hallway near the sunroom when she saw Eli struggling with a model airplane wing, his small fingers unable to make the piece fit, frustration creasing his face. She shouldn't interfere, Mrs. Collins' warning echoed in her mind, but before she could stop herself, Grace knelt down and gently took the wing, fitting it into place with a soft click. Eli looked up at her, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Then something happened. The tiniest smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. Grace's heart cracked wide open. She smiled back and gave him a small wave, and he waved in return. That night, Grace lay in her bed thinking about that wave, such a small thing, but it meant everything. The next morning, she left something on the stairs where Eli always sat, a folded paper bird made from scrap paper she found in the kitchen. She didn't wait to see if he would take it, but the following day the bird was gone, and in its place was a note, 2 shaky words: "Thank you." Grace pressed the note to her chest and closed her eyes, whispering into the quiet, "Lord, let me help this child, show me how." She didn't know it yet, but God was already answering. Grace didn't know it yet, but that simple paper bird marked the beginning of something dangerous and something holy. She whispered her prayers softly that night: "Lord, let me help this child, show me how," and there was no voice from heaven, no sudden revelation, just silence. But the next morning something felt different. Over the next few days, Grace and Eli began to develop something quiet and secret between them, not spoken words but small gestures. She left him candy wrapped in gold foil hidden on the staircase where he always sat, and he left her drawings of airplanes and clocks. She learned his signs, not the formal ones his tutors tried to teach him but the personal ones he invented himself. When he tapped his chest twice, it meant he was happy. When he pointed toward the sky, it meant he was thinking about stars, and when he pressed both palms together tight against his chest, it meant safe. Slowly, he began using that sign around her, safe, and Grace treasured it more than anything she owned. But not everyone in the house was blind to what was happening. One evening, as Grace washed dishes in the kitchen, a shadow fell across the doorway and Mrs. Collins stood there. "I've seen you with the boy." Grace's stomach dropped. "Ma'am, I warned you," Mrs. Collins said sharply. "Mr. Hale has rules. Staff does not get close to Eli." "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Grace said quietly. "He's just lonely." "That's not your concern." Mrs. Collins stepped closer. "You're here to clean, not to mother that child, not to fix what can't be fixed." Grace bit her tongue. Fix what can't be fixed. That was what everyone said, even here in the house where the boy lived. They had all given up on him. "If Mr. Hale finds out you've been interfering," Mrs. Collins continued, "you'll be gone, no references, no second chances," and then she walked away, her heels clicking like a countdown. That night, Grace sat on her bed staring at the wall, thinking about her grandmother, the bills, the paycheck she desperately needed, and then thinking about Eli, his lonely eyes, the pain she saw flash across his face, and the dark shape she had noticed deep inside his ear. Fix what can't be fixed. But what if it could be fixed? What if everyone was wrong? Grace picked up her Bible and held it close. Lord, she whispered, I don't know what to do. I can't lose this job, but I can't ignore what I'm seeing. She waited, but no answer came, only the weight of a decision she wasn't ready to make. Outside her window, the moon hung low and heavy, and inside her heart, a war was beginning between what she needed to survive and what she knew was right. The next morning came cold and quiet. Grace was sweeping the hallway when she heard it, a soft thud, then nothing. She stopped and listened, then another sound, like a muffled cry, and her heart jumped. She followed the sound toward the garden door, and there was Eli sitting on the stone bench, his small body hunched over, both hands pressed tightly against his right ear, his face twisted in agony, tears streaming down his cheeks but no sound coming out. He was crying in complete silence. Grace dropped the broom and ran to him, kneeling in front of him with shaking hands. Eli, look at me. He opened his eyes, red and wet and full of pain. She gently signed, your ear, and he nodded. Grace's chest felt like it was being crushed. Can I look? She signed carefully. I'll be gentle, I promise. He hesitated, fear flickering across his face, then he leaned forward. This child, who had been poked and prodded by doctors his whole life, trusted her. Grace swallowed hard, tilted his head gently toward the morning light, and looked. There it was, deep inside his ear canal, something dark, dense, glistening like wet stone, and her breath stopped. It was bigger than before, clearer. How had every doctor missed this? How had every scan overlooked it? Grace's mind raced back to her cousin Marcus, deaf for 6 years, written off by doctors until someone finally looked. One simple procedure, one moment of attention, and his world exploded into sound. Her hands trembled. Eli, she signed slowly, there's something in your ear, something that shouldn't be there. His eyes went wide. We need to tell your father. Panic exploded across his face, his hands moving fast. No, no doctors. Please, they hurt me, always hurt, never help. Grace's heart shattered. 8 years of specialists, 8 years of procedures, 8 years of pain with no relief, he had learned that help meant suffering. Grace took his small hands in hers and looked into his eyes. I would never hurt you, she whispered, never. He stared at her, and slowly his breathing calmed, but the fear didn't leave his eyes. Grace sat with him until the tears dried, until his hands stopped shaking, then she walked back inside, her mind spinning. She knew what she had seen, she knew what it meant, but what could she do? Tell Jonathan Hale and watch him call the same specialists who had missed it for years, or do nothing and watch this child suffer in silence. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling while her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, God doesn't always send help in fancy packages, baby girl. Sometimes he sends it through folks with nothing but willing hands. Grace closed her eyes. Her hands were willing, but was she brave enough to use them? 3 days passed and Grace couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely think. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it, that dark mass lodged deep inside Eli's ear blocking everything, and Eli's face, the pain, the silent tears. On the 3rd night, she sat on the edge of her bed with her Bible open in her lap, but the words blurred together and all she could see was Marcus, her cousin, deaf for 6 years, written off by every doctor until someone finally looked. One procedure, one moment of attention, and his world exploded into sound. Grace's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She knew what she had seen, she knew, but who was she? A maid with no degree, no training, no right to touch that boy. If she was wrong, if she hurt him, she would go to prison. If she was right but Jonathan Hale found out she had acted without permission, she would lose everything, her job, her income, her grandmother's care. Lord, she whispered, her voice cracking, what do you want from me? There was no answer, only silence and the ticking of the clock. Grace thought about her brother Daniel, dead at 14. He had been sick for months, complaining of pain, but they couldn't afford doctors or help. She watched him fade, watched him struggle to breathe, watched him try to speak words that wouldn't come, and he died in her arms, silent, just like Eli's world. That day, Grace had made a promise to herself and to God. Never again would she stand by while a child suffered because no one acted. But this was different. This wasn't her brother. This was a billionaire's son, and she was nobody. Grace closed her Bible and stood, walking to the window where the moon hung heavy outside, spilling silver light across the gardens. Somewhere in that mansion, a little boy was sleeping with pain in his ear and silence in his world, and she was the only one who had noticed, the only one who had seen. God, she breathed, I'm scared, I'm so scared, but if this is what you're asking. Her voice trailed off as her grandmother's words returned to her. The Lord doesn't call the equipped, baby girl, He equips the called. Grace wiped her eyes and made a decision. Tomorrow, if Eli showed pain again, she would act. She would trust what God had shown her, even if it cost her everything. Grace climbed into bed with her heart pounding. Sleep wouldn't come, but peace did, a strange heavy peace that comes when you step off the cliff and trust that God will catch you. Tomorrow was coming, and with it the moment that would change everything. The next evening came too quickly. Jonathan Hale was away on business and the house was quiet. Grace was folding linens in the hallway when she heard it, a thump, and her heart stopped. She ran toward the sound and found Eli lying on the hallway floor curled up with both hands pressed hard against his ear, his face contorted in agony and tears streaming down his cheeks, silent tears. Grace dropped to her knees beside him. I'm here, baby, I'm here. She cradled his head gently and tilted it toward the lamplight, and the dark mass was clearly visible now, swollen and pressing against the ear canal. Her hands trembled. This was it, the moment. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out the sterilized tweezers she had taken from the first aid kit 3 days earlier just in case. Her breath came in short bursts. Lord, she whispered, guide my hands, please. Eli looked up at her, his eyes wide, scared but trusting. I won't hurt you, she signed with one hand, I promise. He nodded slowly. Grace steadied herself, took a breath, and gently, carefully moved the tweezers into his ear canal. Her hand shook as she felt it, the dark mass, dense and sticky. She hooked it carefully and pulled, resistance, her heart hammering. She pulled again, slow and careful, and then release. Something slid free and landed in her palm, dark, wet, biological, years of buildup that had stolen his hearing. Grace stared at it, her stomach turning, but before she could react, Eli gasped, a real audible gasp. His hand flew to his ear and his eyes went wide, wider than she had ever seen them. He sat up suddenly, looking around the hallway like he had never seen it before. Then he pointed at the grandfather clock on the wall, the one that had been ticking his whole life, the one he had never heard. His mouth opened and a sound came out, rough, broken, unpracticed, but real. Tick, he whispered. Grace's tears fell. Yes, baby, that's the clock, you can hear it. Eli's whole body trembled as he touched his throat, feeling the vibration of his own voice, his eyes filling with wonder and fear and something else, hope. His mouth opened again and one word came out, the first real word he had ever spoken, Dad. Grace sobbed and pulled him close, holding him as sound flooded his world for the first time in 8 years. Grace was still holding Eli when the footsteps came, heavy and fast, running down the hallway. She looked up and saw Jonathan Hale standing in the doorway, his face white as death, his eyes locked on his son sitting on the floor and then on the blood on Grace's hands. What have you done? Jonathan's voice shook the walls as he rushed forward, pushing Grace aside and grabbing Eli by the shoulders. What did she do to you? Eli flinched at the sound. It was so loud, so sharp, but then his mouth opened. Dad, I can hear you. Jonathan froze, his entire body going rigid. What? Eli reached up and touched his father's face. Your voice, he whispered, is that your voice? Jonathan's legs buckled, but before the moment could breathe, before he could understand what was happening, his eyes dropped to Grace's hands, the blood, the tweezers, the dark mass sitting in her palm, and fear overtook wonder. Security! Jonathan bellowed, and 2 guards appeared instantly. Get her away from my son. Grace's heart shattered. Sir, please listen to me. I didn't hurt him. I helped him. Look. She held out her palm, showing him the blockage. This was inside his ear. This is why he couldn't hear. I removed it. You're not a doctor, Jonathan roared. You could have killed him. The guards grabbed Grace's arms. Eli screamed, actually screamed. No, don't take her. The sound of his son's voice, loud, desperate, real, stopped Jonathan cold, but the fear was stronger. Take her to the security office. Call the police. Grace didn't resist. As they dragged her away, she looked back at Eli and mouthed, It's okay, you're going to be okay. Eli sobbed, loud, messy sobs, the first sounds of grief he had ever made. At the hospital, doctors swarmed around Eli, tests, scans, examinations, while Jonathan paced the hallway, his mind spinning. His son was speaking, hearing, responding to sound. It was impossible. A nurse approached him and said, Mr. Hale, the doctor needs to speak with you urgently. Jonathan followed her into a small office where Dr. Reynolds sat behind the desk with a grim face. Mr. Hale, I don't know how to say this. Just say it. The doctor slid a folder across the desk. This is your son's scan from 3 years ago. Jonathan opened it and there, circled in red, was a notation, dense obstruction noted in right ear canal. Recommend immediate removal. Jonathan's blood turned to ice. Someone saw this? Dr. Reynolds nodded slowly. There's no follow-up, no procedure scheduled. Your account was flagged for ongoing treatment protocol. The words hit Jonathan like a bullet, ongoing treatment protocol. They had known, they had seen the blockage, and they had left it there because his money was too good, because his desperation was profitable. They kept my son deaf, Jonathan whispered on purpose. Dr. Reynolds said nothing, but his silence said everything. Jonathan's hands trembled, all those years, all those millions, all those specialists shaking their heads. They had lied, and the one person who had told the truth, the one person who had actually helped, was sitting in his security office waiting to be arrested. Jonathan stood up. Where are you going? The doctor asked. Jonathan didn't answer. He had a woman to find and a lifetime of apologies to make. Grace sat alone in the security office with her hands folded and her head bowed. She wasn't praying for herself, she was praying for Eli, that his hearing would hold, that his father would understand, that the boy would finally know what it felt like to live in a world full of sound. The door opened and Grace looked up to see Jonathan Hale standing there, but he wasn't the same man who had dragged her away earlier. His eyes were red, his face broken, like a man who had watched his whole world crumble and rebuild in the same breath. Grace, he said softly. She stood and said, Mr. Hale, I can explain. Don't, he said, walking toward her slowly, don't explain, don't apologize, don't say a word. He stopped in front of her, and then this billionaire, this man who controlled empires, fell to his knees. I'm sorry, he whispered, I'm so sorry. Grace's breath caught. The doctors knew, Jonathan said, his voice cracking. They saw the blockage years ago. They left it there because my money was too good to cure. Tears streamed down his face. I trusted credentials and degrees and expensive hospitals. He looked up at her. But you did. You saw him. You saw his pain. You paid attention when no one else bothered. Grace's tears fell. I just loved him, sir, that's all. Jonathan shook his head. No, he said quietly, that's everything. Jonathan rose slowly from his knees, wiping his face with shaking hands. I've spent 8 years trying to buy a miracle, he said quietly, and God sent one through the woman I hired to clean my floors. Grace wiped her eyes. God uses the willing, Mr. Hale, she said softly. That's what my grandmother always says. Jonathan nodded. She's right. They walked back to Eli's hospital room together, the hallway feeling lighter now, as if hope itself had weight and was filling the air. Inside the room, Eli sat upright on the bed with headphones over his ears, listening to music for the first time in his life. Real music. His face was pure wonder, his eyes wide as he absorbed every sound. When he saw them, he pulled the headphones off and ran straight to Grace, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, unpracticed, but beautiful. Grace knelt and held him tight. "You were always worth hearing, baby," she whispered, "always." Eli pulled back and looked at his father. "Dad," he said slowly, testing the word, "I can hear your heart." Jonathan froze. "What?" he asked. "It's beating fast," Eli said, placing his hand on Jonathan's chest. Jonathan dropped to his knees and pulled his son close, holding him tightly. For the first time in 8 years, Eli heard his father cry, and Grace, standing quietly beside them, finally let herself breathe. God had answered her prayer, not with money, not with medicine, but with willing hands and a faithful heart. Sometimes that's all a miracle needs. Some miracles don't come from hospitals. They come from people who care enough to look closer. If this story moved you, like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who needs hope today, because you never know, this might be the story they were meant to find.